welcome to this episode. This is more of a unscripted kind of talk. I'm your host, Robin Bevan, and today I'm just want to talk more really about the Corybantes and I guess Dionysus and Zeus as divine child and kind of the divine child archetype, kind of the need to protect that. Artemis and the Corybantes really represent that. And the thing really is that, that the divine child archetype is just something that isn't really, present within many people. Not really. Because the divine child archetype, connects to the inner child. I mean, I suppose there's plenty of people that are connecting to their inner child and doing things like that, but it has to do with the authentic self of the person and kind of, the authentic self of the person beyond all these societal expectations and various other unnecessary pressures that are pushed onto this, aspect of the self. And this might be, something celebrated within children. However, things are not as easy regarding life on this earth. Because the thing is that, especially when it comes to, trauma or kind of anything of the sort, this can, create problems. Similarly, any scapegoating that happens or any burden shifting that any government does onto people or, like the youth or anything of the sort, mental health issues and all these familial dysfunctional issues and various issues of the sort also, can lead to this disconnection from the divine child archetype. The potential that is generally present within the child in, which could blossom into the self archetype, the full self archetype. However, this is not something that always happens. This is generally maybe something that generally maybe doesn't happen. Because it's actually pretty rare, to find like a full embodiment of the self archetype. Because many people get disconnected from the self, and especially in a society where there is kind of like this underlying Chronos tendency to devour the divine child, to repress it in that sense. Yeah, there's a little bit of an issue there. Because the thing is that, a lot of this creativity, imagination kind of aspect of human nature, but also really, think about how society treats art or artists and anything of the sort, or generally speaking anything like, emotional or tied to dependency or anything of the sort. Like, to some degree, like, they're like, with children, some people tend to be like okay with that, but like later, but there's a lot of issues there, really. A lot of adults later in life have issues with dependency needs that they might really be unable to deal with, even when it comes to just children, really. But the other thing is that these dependency needs and, these unmet needs, especially, when it comes to, for instance, emotional neglect or there are other issues later in life, when it comes to bullying or this like familial or like educational or other pressures that are there, on children, creates a myriad of problems and various aspects of the child, the potential of the child. So the divine child gets repressed to conform to this expectation put on them by either their parents or like society, or that's really just the parents, really, because it says like the society or education or this or that. And the thing is that the divine child, and really the self child and this potential within the individual is something that needs protecting. In myth, Artemis, for instance, has this role of protecting the vulnerable, but the Corybantes as well have this role where they protected the divine child, Dionysus and Zeus. And Zeus overthrowing, Kronos, for instance. But the matter of the fact is that it's important for the divine child to be nurtured and protected from these outside forces, from the titans, from these societal expectations and all these pressures, and basically, it's kind of the hyper-rationality that's a threat, but also chaos itself as well. And if we do not, protect our children from that, later, the kind of teens as well, equip them to not be subsumed by that, what we really get is a lot of problems, and usually these problems were solved, through either the Choreos or Octea, these kind of rite of passages, where the children could still, try to reclaim their instinctual emotional self, the primal self, which is something important to be connected to. Because the thing is, that's the connection to the unconscious as well. Which is something that a lot of people really have lost, this kind of connection. Which also leads to a lot of problems. I think the meaning crisis, because being disconnected from the divine child, the self-child, and the self also leads to a lack of meaning and purpose. But the disconnection regarding, for instance, emotions and instinct also leads to a belonging crisis. And generally, because of emotional suppression, a lack of meaningful connections, and depression, because of, for instance, the divine child being repressed, or, any trauma that happens. With the shadow, playing an important role as well. The shadow containing all these repressed aspects of the self. Where there's also emotional suppression, that is often the case, identity issues and feelings of inadequacy. And the emotional suppression also ties directly into suppressed needs as well. Because these are tied together. Because that's how we know of our needs and that's how we know of our needs and our instinctual urges and really, the deeper needs that we have as a human. And I've laid here out the scapegoat complex, and in this video I just want to highlight a few things. I don't want to go too deep into all of this. Really, I just want to highlight a little bit regarding the victim child, which is the most important aspect here, also tied to trauma and these expectations and all these repressed aspects where the internal redeemer is often cut off, the divine child, the self-child, which can, lead to a rebirth. The victim child here is also tied to cut off dependency needs as well, often tied to a caregiving or a ghost persona or both, which is often tied to familial pressure, or like the parents using the child basically as a parent, so to parentify the child in some sense. And the victim child also carries a lot of unmet needs, anger, which often isn't really well expressed, can even lead to explosive moments as well. As the assertiveness is also cut off, and this is often lashed out towards, that's projected as the accuser or the priest. But there often tends to be a tendency to seek some external redeemer figure, though, like a cult guru kind of figure, or so, the Jordan Peterson types and stuff like that, the Uber boyos and the Young to Live bys. The matter of the fact is that the real inner redemption is the internal redeemer, so it's the divine child, the self-child, from which, the hero and the wise old man can grow, or the wise old woman. That's the potential, that's been cut off through the trauma, through, what happened. And there also often tends to be the outcast persona as well, which, also ties into the belonging crisis as well. And these personas are very much also, like unconscious roles that we play, where there's unconscious beliefs tied to that, like the caregiving role, like, well, if I do this, I can, keep the family together, or I can, make sure that there's harmony and peace, and there's no conflict, or they won't harm me, or, like similarly with the ghost persona too. But, a lot of this stuff leads to the cutoff of dependency needs, and like one's emotions, so the emotional suppression, which also leads, with the ghost persona to identity issues, and the caregiving persona, for instance, to responsibility overload, suppressed needs, and low self-esteem. And later on in life also difficulty setting boundaries, emotional neglect, kind of like going on from childhood to later in life, which is kind of just continues as a pattern. And finally, chronic self-reliance. We kind of get stuck in this self-reliance mindset, kind of like, well, I can't have any dependency needs or any needs at all. And the thing is that the problem is that because these dependency needs weren't met in childhood, later in life, one's actual needs and emotional needs aren't verbalized either. And when they're not verbalized, at some point, from the victim child, there's this emotional explosion towards, what's seen as the accuser figure, or the priest, or even an external redeemer figure. And you're gonna get that kind of emotional explosion, and that's just gonna happen. And there's a lot of anger and resentment that can come with that as well. But the thing is that, these dynamics, like starting in childhood, don't go away. And these issues, carry over from the family into society. And with that, very much also into any future relationship as well. That's kind of where you get, men and women seeking a mommy daddy kind of figure in other people. How, all these young men were seeking a father figure in Jordan Peterson, or how they seek some mommy figure in different women, and it's often unconsciously so that they do this. And they're doing that to, get away from the depression and to get away from the feelings of inadequacy, and to try to fill these unmet needs. But the matter of the fact is that, by being unconscious of it and projecting all this onto these, different people or even a therapist, well, those are expectations placed on people that can't really be really fulfilled. Because the thing is, they are not any real replacement for any mother or father figure. Because the thing is that any mother or father figure can only be accessed really by going in. You really have to go inward towards, you have to deal with all these repressed emotions that are there with the victim child and actually work through that to get to the divine child, the self child. Which also means, you have to be there for yourself and these kind of things, but you also build relationships that are, let's say it like this, interdependent. Where there can be dependency, but there's also independence as well. And the thing is that just pure independence is not really possible. You get into chronic self-reliance and all that kind of stuff, and it's not possible. You're gonna, at some point, hit a point where you do need help. Or at some point, where really if you would work together with other people, you would actually achieve a lot more. You would actually do a lot more. That's why humans used to have this thing called community. We don't have that anymore, not really. But it's something important. But another important issue regarding a lot of this too, this kind of dynamic, especially with the caregiving, persona and the ghost persona, for instance, as well, very much ties into, with the difficulty setting boundaries and a lot of other things. It's kind of that the authentic self basically gets pushed into the shadow, pushed away into the unconscious, where you get cut off from that, and you kind of have this false self based on, what the accuser, the inner critic, or really the societal expectations are about. So you kind of, become this conformist, depressed puppet. And you feel that. And it's an issue that's really there within society, it's really affecting a lot of people. And, the thing is that really the only way out regarding that is to, face the shadow, to go and try to reconnect with the divine child, the inner child, the self child, and to, from that grow into the hero, the wise old man, the wise old woman. Because that's the only way how to do that, how that evolves. Because if you're just stuck in this ghost persona, caregiving persona, or outcast persona, or whatever other persona that is not really you, well, then you're not going to individuate, then you're not going to go from divine child to hero to wise old man or wise old woman. A lot of the time, what actually happens is that you get stuck in this Ouroboros state of projective identification, or something along the sort, where a lot of the times all this trauma is projected, and the shadow is projected onto others and society, and they're the evil ones, and and it goes into all kinds of weird shit like that. The thing is, sure, there are people that have abused people and things that have happened, and these things are real, and they should be held accountable. And similarly how, the leaders as well need to be accountable and need to be actually taking on the responsibility that they should be taking on, and not, like burden shifting that to, well, the common people, because that's just fucking wrong. And similarly, what is wrong is also just the fact that a lot of what's been going on regarding all this burden shifting and all these different dynamics, and kind of like trying to just solve everything with pills and all this other stuff. It's just that it doesn't go into the core of the issue. It doesn't actually tackle the shadow. It doesn't actually go and tackle this what is within the unconscious. And it's important that it is tackled if we want to get out of this situation. If we want to, get out of this cave and go towards the sunlight, towards the actual sun, the actual world, like reality as it actually is. If we want to actually be who we used to be and are. Because a lot of these things are personas and roles that we're forced into, that are just not us. But we feel this obligation to fulfill this, either familiar pressure or societal pressure or something along the lines. But the thing is that, like, sure, there's demands and there's like a reality out there, but also at the same time, we cannot, sell ourselves out. We can't deny our trauma or our needs or the real potential, that is locked up within ourselves. And it doesn't matter how old or how young we are. What matters is that we allow ourselves to tap into that. So that we actually can live a meaningful life. Something that's connected to who we really are authentically. And that's how we have a meaningful life. How we're connected to the soul, the self, and to something bigger than ourselves as well.